This is the John Huff Podcast After Dark. Well, that's right, kids. The sun went down many, many hours ago. I have just returned from 3 hours of pickleball, and I've taken a shower, and I cleaned myself up, and I should be going to bed, but I feel vigorous. And I sit here tonight on Manic Monday night, just in awe, once again, of that magical mystery of nature's timing. That time of year, kids, it's that time of year when you look out your window one day and the sun is shining and you know it's getting warmer out. But all the trees are bare. And then you look out the next day, and oh, wonder of wonders, the leaves are out. And I just need a minute. I just feel so much gratitude for that moment. You know, every year it comes, and I just feel so much gratitude for the leaves being out. Look, Leaf fans, okay, those of you who are out there right now, and you are saying how much you are sick and tired of meeting the Boston Bruins in the first round or the second round. You're tired of meeting the Bruins in the playoffs. I'm with you, okay? I agree with you. And I'm a little bit frustrated that none of you are hip. None of you are expressing the sort of sympathy that someone in my position deserves in all of this. You're all hand-wringing about the Leafs going out again, and it is selfish, and it is self-absorbed, and I need you to begin to understand how some of the rest of us feel. Okay, now I, for 50 years, kids, have been a Montreal Canadiens fan, okay? And as such, I have two, I was going to say sworn enemies, but we try not to use that kind of language on this program. We're all about the positive talk. All right, but as a Canadiens fan, you have two chief, lingering, deeply entrenched rivals, okay? They are the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Boston Bruins, right? Now, this rivalry with the Bruins goes back freaking decades, all right? This goes back probably 100 years or close to it, and it's the product of playing in the same division for like 100 freaking years and countless playoff rounds, battles, Cam freaking Neely and Bork and Don Cherry and Rocket Richard and PK Subban with the slap shot winner. This is a rivalry that goes back freaking decades, man. And it is born of intense competition, all right? And it is a fierce rivalry. Now, the rivalry with the Leafs goes back literally hundreds of years, okay? We are not talking about just an on-ice rivalry here. We are talking about English Canada versus French Canada, okay? This is a rivalry that goes back to the freaking Battle of the Plains of Abraham, 1759. It goes back further than that. This rivalry goes back to the Battle of freaking Hastings, 1066. This is a rivalry. Montreal Canadiens, les Glorieux, les Canadiens de Montréal, against the Toronto Maple Leafs, goes back bloody 1,000 years and maybe even beyond that, okay? This is not just Habs versus Leafs. Okay, this is Wolf versus Montcalm. This is Wellington versus Napoleon, all right? This is the Norman invasion of England. You think to yourself, what are you talking about, man? The French and the English were sworn enemies before the First World War happened, okay? That was an odd couple among odd couples. But there's an old device that they use in screenwriting, that they use in novels. And if you've got a character who's kind of a prick, but you need him to be sympathetic, you place beside him a bigger prick. And so here you have the French and the English looking at each other as royal pricks. Enter Kaiser Wilhelm, okay? That's what happened in the First World War. But previous to that, sworn enemies for a freaking millennium, all right? And that is the rivalry of the Montreal Canadiens and the Toronto Maple Leafs. It is just a sporting equivalent, just another battlefield of the many in the old world and the new, upon which this bitter, deep-seated rivalry and hatred between the English and the French was conducted and carried out, all right? That's Leafs versus Habs, all right? That's the intensity we're talking about in at least how this rivalry used to be. Not so much anymore. And I know what you're thinking, all right? You're thinking to yourself, dude, you're not French. Right you are, and no, I'm not. And there was a point in time when mon père, mein Vater, was in fact, and it pains me deeply. I want to be honest on this program. I want to be confessional. Don't want to keep secrets from you. There was a point in time when mein Vater was, in fact, it pains me deeply to say this, a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. Oh. Just give me a minute. This predates me, all right? But there was a point in time, my father, growing up in English Canada, was a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. But here's the thing, okay? Here's the thing. We Brinkerhoffs are and always have been about class, okay? And there came a point in time when the Toronto Maple Leafs became owned and managed by a dude called Harold Ballard, okay? Now, those of you who are of a certain vintage will remember the Ballard years for the Toronto Maple Leafs. That dude was a maniac, a criminal, actually, who ran the team very badly. All right, went to prison, did Harold Ballard, for misappropriating funds, taking them out of the team to pay for like motorcycles for his kids and to do renos on his freaking cottage. He took money out of the team to put it into his own private personal pursuits, right? The sort of thing that Manchester United fans complain about their American owners for, by the way, in the present day. Harold Ballard was a freaking fraud, and he ran the team into the ground. He was a freaking maniac micromanager. He treated the players very badly. He took funds out of the team to fund his own private estates. Bad ownership, man. And he chased away people like Lanny McDonald, and he did that so he could annoy Daryl Sittler, his captain, and they railroaded Dave Keon, Leafs legend. Harold Ballard, bad owner, and not a really great dude, man. And he ran that team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, into the freaking ground. And there came a certain point where mein Vater said, I'm not down with this, Jack. All right, I'm a fan of this team. I'm watching the ownership behave deplorably. Need that swamp drained, if you need a modern vernacular on it. And he said, I'm not doing this anymore because we Brinkerhoffs, we are all about class, man. And when you think about iced hockey and class, what do you think of, kids? Do you think of the Las Vegas Golden Knights? Do you think of that storied franchise, the Seattle Kraken? 9! You think of the Montreal Canadiens. Les Glorieux, we of the 24 Stanley Cups. And mein Vater said, I'm going where they have some freaking class. And he nailed up the colors of the Montreal Canadiens to the flagpole and has ever since been a Habs fan. And I was born into that, okay? Because form is temporary, class is permanente. And so every spring now comes round that the Leafs play the freaking Bruins. And I don't think you're appreciating the position that puts me in, okay? Because I hate the Bruins. I hate those yellow and black bastards, all right? All the way back to Cam freaking Neely, Rick Middleton. Take your freaking pick. Hate the Bruins. Hate them. And yet, every year, you freaking Leafs make me cheer for them against your team in a rivalry that goes back 1,000 freaking years. Can you do us a freaking solid, Toronto? Can you do us a solid and lose to somebody else for a freaking change? Come on! It's a sign of growth. A couple things right now are a sign of growth, okay? One is to not mention that the last time I can remember the Leafs losing to somebody in the playoffs, it was to Montreal. It would be very, very low character of me to mention that, so I'm not going to. It's also a sign of growth to have some empathy with your enemy. Again, we're not using that language. It is a sign of growth to have some empathy for your rival. Okay, now I was among Leaf fans on Saturday night when the big Game 7 was happening. I spent some time in the company of Leaf fans. It was very difficult for me. Okay, this is a toxic environment. The only thing I think I've seen that's worse in the flesh with my own freaking eyes than a gaggle of playoff Leaf fans is something I saw in Amsterdam that has scarred my eyes forever, man. And I'm not the first person to say of Amsterdam, I saw something there that scarred my eyes forever. I was in Amsterdam a few years ago, and I'm just having an awful flashback of seeing in the wild, in the flesh, surrounded by police officers on horseback, a group probably 50 strong in blue jerseys of Chelsea fans. And that's a thing, kids, where, you see that and it changes you because you grow up with a certain mythology, right? You grow up with the mythology, starts with the Brothers Grimm. It starts with just this vivid imagination of the awfulness of the world. You grow up in church and you are taught that there are evil things out there, right? And there's stuff happening in the world that is toxic and terrible and should not be allowed. And yet it persists and yet it exists. And you think it can't be as bad as they say, right? It can't be as bad as they say. It can't be as dark as the fairy tales you read from the Brothers Grimm, right? These things don't really exist. And then you're walking down the street in Amsterdam, which is one of the great cities on earth. Amsterdam, the tawdry sister of Vienna. And you see a group of Chelsea fans in the wild and you think, Revelation is true. All of the awfulness that they talked about in the Bible, it's true, because I'm looking at it right now. Chelsea fans in the wild. Now, that's the worst thing I've ever seen, right? Those people were in Amsterdam because Chelsea was playing Ajax in the Champions League. And, you have to make a choice. I'm convinced now that one of the reasons they move so much weed in Amsterdam is because groups of people like that keep coming into their cities, all right? It's like a version of the Norman invasion. And the people can't deal, right? Because your city is being infiltrated and invaded by just this awfulness, and it leaves a mark. It leaves a psychic mark on your town. When a group of Chelsea fans comes to visit, right? And you can surround them with all the horses you want, all the police officers you want, but that stain just leaches into the asphalt, man, leaches into the bike paths of Amsterdam, pulls people down, and it's not a thing that anybody should have to see, all right? Those of us who are Arsenal fans are somewhat protected, We wear that kind of cloak of courage upon us, but my goodness, if you're an unsuspecting civilian, you happen upon a group of Chelsea fans in the wild, that's a really, really, really dangerous place to be, man. Psychically, I mean. It will get you. It will affect you. And so there I am on Saturday night, and I'm amongst Leaf fans celebrating's very obviously the wrong word. Leaf fans taking in Game 7 against the Bruins. And I'm amongst them because I was at a birthday party for the great Chris McCready, guitar player extraordinaire, with whom I perform frequently in the Carly Thomas Band. Celebrating a 50th birthday, and a wonderful time was had, and no little thanks is owed to the Boston Bruins for that ultimately. But it's a sign of personal growth, and I'm being somewhat serious here. It's a sign of personal growth. It's a sign that you are beginning to get past the ego when you can have a certain empathy for fans of your rivals, because ultimately it's not really the team that you have a rivalry with, all right? It is up to a point, right? But beyond that, it's the fans that you have a rivalry with. Because players come and go, and the player that you hate on one team could very easily be on your team next year, and then you love that guy, and vice versa, right? This guy you cheered for a decade suddenly joins the Leafs. You hate that freaking guy, and you never liked him. And that's to do with just the association, I think, with the fan base. It's the fans where the arguments happen. One time, I went to Montreal, and we got tickets to see a game against the Leafs, and I'll never do that again. Now, I am a mild-mannered person. I am not prone to violence. I eschew even talk of violence. I'm in the upper bowl, in the cheap seats, quote-unquote, no such thing in Montreal or Toronto for that matter. I'm in the cheap seats, and who occupies the cheap seats in Montreal at a game? The away fans. And so all around me are Leaf fans, and then the rest of us are Montreal fans. And as the game goes on, and it gets just a little drunker in there, you're ready to rip somebody's freaking head off because they're poking at your ego. It's like, I'm not on the ice. I've never been drafted by the Montreal Canadiens. I'm merely a fan of the team. But that identity with the team, you can be poked so hard in the ego by fans of the other side. And that's where the real rivalry happens. And if, like me, you grow up in the middle of freaking Ontario, utterly surrounded around every corner by Leafs homers who just don't shut up about the Toronto freaking Maple Leafs, and you've got that drilled down your freaking throat by the national television networks, TSN, Toronto Sports Network, right? All the networks are Leafs homers. All the people around you are Leafs homers. It's toxic. It's terrible. And you grow up that way. You develop a certain chip upon your shoulder to those people because they are representatives of your very chief rival. Now, it's a sign of spiritual growth to be able to say to yourself, okay, chances are good. I don't know if this exists or not, but let's theorize for a minute. Chances are good that if there's a person who lives in Montreal and cheers for Toronto, Montreal fans are equally as obsessed and obnoxious in Montreal and throughout Quebec as Toronto fans seem to be around Ontario. Okay, I'm beginning to recognize this is a sign of transcending the ego, that I can recognize that fan groups are probably more or less the same everywhere, except if you see a group of Arsenal fans in the wild, you will often see them picking up litter, right? Helping old ladies across the street. This is just part of the Arsenal culture, right? That's a rare thing, but fan bases everywhere are probably equally obnoxious and toxic. The difference is I didn't grow up everywhere. I grew up in Ontario, surrounded by Leaf fans, having to listen to this freaking crap my whole life as my team was, winning Stanley Cups. And theirs wasn't. And that gets to you after a while, man. And so I count it as legit. I count it as a sign of spiritual growth, a sign of beginning to transcend the ego, that I can have a certain amount of empathy for Toronto Maple Leaf fans in this another dark hour. That on that evening, I could bite my tongue as the Go Leafs Go stuff started in the freaking basement in front of the television. And I was not there. I had left by the time the Leafs scored a goal. And, thank Buddha for that, because I'm not sure my ego transcendence has reached that kind of level yet. But I held my tongue for the most part. And I was able to have civil discourse with other Leaf fans about their prospects and about their trajectory these days. And after the Leafs had lost, without seeming to be too magnanimous about it, I was able to sympathize with my friends, because at the end of the day, these are my friends, rivals, yes, on the ice. Rivals to a certain extent off the ice, but my feeling is if you can be somewhat generous and somewhat self-aware about your fandom, I can meet you there. I can meet you in that place. And I can take a look at it and say, well, the Leafs got themselves down 3-1. And unlike the Canadians, when they got down 3-1 against the Leafs a few years ago and then came back and won that series, the Leafs did fight their way back from 3-1 down back to 3-3. All right, won some clutch games. Goaltending came up big. They won those games without their star player, Austin Matthews. Some people would argue the team looked better without him. I can't comment on that. I don't watch them during the regular season, because why on earth would you? But I was at least able to acknowledge the fortitude of the team to come back and to make a series of it and to push that game to overtime. And hey, man, overtime is a crapshoot, right? Overtime is like a penalty shootout in your soccer match, right? It's kind of a flip of a coin for the most part who's going to win in overtime. Didn't go Toronto's way. Glad it didn't. But at the same time, I can have empathy with Toronto fans whose dreams are once again crushed. And it's easy. All right, it is easy from the what would seem to be winning position to have that empathy. I recognize that. Again, being magnanimous can be kind of a dick move. So I'm not being that. All right, I can be honest. I've talked to Leaf fans. I've said they showed some courage. They showed some fight that they have not shown at times in other rounds. And it's too bad that they lost. One of the hardest things to do is to genuinely be happy for fans of your rivals as they enjoy some success. Now, that's not Toronto and hasn't been for a long time. But if you can reach that point where fans of a team you hate are celebrating something and you can say, well, good for them, you have truly transcended, all right? That is reaching another level. That is the Tao in action. I got a long way to go, okay? I've got a long way to go. But if the Toronto series demonstrates anything, I've made a baby step towards self-actualization. because I can carry a smidge of empathy, a smidge of empathy for Toronto fans who have seen their team lose again. But the reality is, I'm not all the way there, because if the Leafs ever do win the freaking cup, and I want you to understand, I'm coming at this from the perspective of a person who doesn't even really follow hockey all that closely anymore, but it's still so deeply embedded within me that if the Leafs ever win the cup, to quote my new favorite podcaster, Jackie Schimmel of the Bitch Bible podcast, I'll probably have to take a bath with my toaster. I'll at least have to leave home for a year if they ever win, because based on what I've seen in the past, in terms of levels of obnoxiousness, don't know if I can deal with that. Don't know if I can deal with that. Now, the Leafs are in a very precarious position right now, okay? The big core four, the four superstars who have carried this team for the past 5 years or so, have not been able to get it done. And so there's some scuttlebutt now. There's some rumors talking about breaking up that core four, trading a couple of them, letting them go, bringing in somebody else. And we're in a window here, all right? Superstar Austin Matthews is in the heart of his prime at this moment, as is Nylander. And I'm listening to the game on the radio, driving home from the party on Saturday night. And I'm listening to Joe Bowen, the biggest Leafs homer of all time. And this is not even, I understand it's Leafs hockey on the radio, but there's no semblance of impartiality here. He's calling the players by their freaking nicknames. Sammy! Samsonov, the goalkeeper. Very, very difficult to listen to, you know? And I understand whoever broadcasts the Canadiens games is probably like that too, but it's in freaking French, so I don't know what they're saying, except, hey, la boo! And the Canadiens win the Stanley Cup. Leafs ever do win it, gonna have to take a bath with my toaster, and that tells me that I've still got some metaphysical work to do. I still have some way to go towards becoming nobody, as we talked about with Ramdas, because I still identify as somebody, and that somebody is a Montreal fan, and part of wearing that uniform is hating the freaking Leafs and hating the Bruins and becoming very frustrated that the Leafs keep making me cheer for the Bruins, which just sucks a little bit of my soul. Every year just sucks a little bit of my soul. A couple weeks ago, I had the experience of watching an Arsenal match with Arsenal fans for the first time in my freaking life. Now, I have been following Arsenal. I've been an Arsenal fan since the mid-90s, okay? Dennis Bergkamp, that whole thing. Wasn't easy to be that, though, back in those days, all right? There was no internet. There wasn't really any coverage in North America of the Premier League. You would get a game of the week, sometimes on whatever sports channel it was. It would be two teams you didn't give a crap about. Blackburn Rovers against Bolton or something like that. Very, very rarely would you see one of the actual big clubs. It's kind of like wrestling in the 80s. You know, Sunday afternoon wrestling, WWF. It would always be the jobbers. You would very rarely see any of the real megastars. You would never see Hulk Hogan. You'd never see Andre the Giant. You'd see some freaking jobber come out and get beat by a mid-card guy or whatever, right? You never saw the really, truly big names. And you didn't really see them in soccer either, right? So you'd get a game of the week, wouldn't care about it, couldn't really follow your team very closely until later on when the internet came and dedicated sports channels came that were beginning to show the Premier League and you could watch every game. You could really sink your teeth into it at that point, right? So I've been a hardcore Arsenal fan following the club for like 15 years now, okay? Had my share of heartbreak, saw them win a few FA Cups, all right? It's been an up and down sort of thing. What I've not had is the experience of watching an Arsenal match with other Arsenal fans, all right? But there's an organization called Arsenal Canada, and they have chapters in cities throughout the country. They have recently launched the Forest City Gooners, which is the Arsenal chapter in L-Town, and we gathered couple weekends ago for the first time together to watch Arsenal absolutely slap up the old enemy Tottenham Hotspur. And I got to tell you, brothers and sisters, the degree to which I dislike the Toronto Maple Leafs, take that and multiply it against freaking Tottenham Hotspur, okay? That is the arch, and I'm using the word enemy. In this case, it applies. The arch enemy of Arsenal is Tottenham Hotspur. And we gathered to watch Arsenal, who currently still leads the English Premier League table with 2 games to go. And you think, well, that's great. We're on our way to a title, except Manchester City has 3 games to go and therefore still sits in pole position. But we're right on the edge of winning the first title I've been able to watch them win if they get there. Needed to beat Spurs away to Spurs in order to keep that title chase alive. Went in, slapped them up hard, tore them apart. Freaking great. And I got to watch that amongst Arsenal fans for the first time in my life. There were like 12 or 15 of us. None of us knew each other really, but as soon as you walk in wearing the scarf, as soon as you walk in wearing the jersey, it's just a kinship, man. You know, your love of this team just pulls people together. And there were Spurs fans in the bar that we went to. You know, you're having a Rickards Red at 9:30 in the freaking morning because it's football culture, all right? There were Spurs fans in the room. Few of them, right? If it came down to throwing hands, we had them outnumbered. But it was actually very cordial. It was very collegial. And part of that is due to Tottenham not even being a shadow of what Arsenal is these days. And we celebrated on that Saturday St. Totteringham's Day. St. Totteringham's Day is the day when it becomes mathematically impossible for Spurs to finish above Arsenal in the league table, okay? And we beat them on their pitch to keep our title chase alive and celebrate St. Totteringham's Day together. And what a feeling that is, you know. And I want to say that the Spurs fans in attendance were very gracious about that because they know their team is lousy this year. And Arsenal is not. And they were accepting of that, and that's cool. Now, if there have been more of them, who knows how this goes down. But the feeling was very collegial. And I began to recognize that it was possible to achieve a certain collegiality in dealing with other fans, provided, again, everybody's willing to meet in this space of self-awareness and this space of not identifying too heavily with the team, right? Recognizing how much of an ego attachment that is, and ego attachments make you do crazy stuff. I've told the story before about being at a Toronto FC game and seeing an almighty brouhaha break out up in the corner of the stadium between 2 groups of rival fans, one fans of Celtic, one fans of Rangers. Neither of those teams on the pitch. They just happened to be in the same proximity. And a war broke out up there, okay? And so it happens, I would assume, in London, where Spurs and Arsenal fans are gathered, the way they run those games, though, is that they do not let the 2 groups of fans mingle, right? So if you are an Arsenal fan visiting Spurs Stadium, you have a separate entrance, right? There's an away fans section, and you have a separate entrance, and your way in and out of the stadium is lined with coppers. And vice versa at other stadiums, because all hell will break loose. And you could suddenly have a riot happening because people become so identified ego-wise. They become so wrapped up in being someone who's an Arsenal fan or someone who's a Spurs fan or theoretically somebody who's a Manchester City fan. And we all know those don't really exist. But theoretically, a person could be identified as that. And then you add a little bit of alcohol like fuel to the fire of ego, and whoosh, right? Stuff goes up. And you can see that happening, right? Stuff was getting heated up in the upper bowl of Leafs versus Habs, that game I went to. And I, pacifist, I, nonviolent, was ready. I was ready. if this thing teed off, because I hated those freaking people because they were poking my ego because the Leafs were winning at that point, whatever. And it's so easy to have your ego poked by people when you've got yourself that wrapped up in your identity as a fan of a team or whatever, right? And this happens in politics. I mean, watch what happens down south. There is no rivalry in sports to come anywhere near the current rivalry between Republicans and Democrats, and in particular, MAGA Republicans who are armed to the freaking teeth. You want to talk about a soccer riot? Start throwing AR-15s into this, man. And it's all ego. It's ego identifying with the team. This is the really great thing and the really toxic thing about sports all at the same time. This identifying with the tribe, but then losing all self-awareness and becoming so ego attached to your place in that tribe that somebody else insulting a team of people who, as Bill Maher said, would hate you if they knew you. And yet you're willing to go to war over somebody insulting that group of people, right? Or insulting your team, insulting your colors, whatever, insulting you as a corollary or as an adjacent to that team. And alcohol is fuel on the fire, man. So it's very easy for this stuff to break out and go crazy. And it happens all the freaking time. I have not witnessed it. I hope to be a calming presence. But even in that game against Toronto, Montreal, I was freaking ready because people can really get under your skin, man, if you are ego attached and ego identified. And so again, I count it as a sign of personal growth that I can, poke a little fun at the Leafs on this broadcast. I can poke a little fun at Tottenham Hotspur on this broadcast from my perch outside the circle. But I can also begin to recognize the level to which my ego attaches to these things. And I get mad watching the game. I get mad watching Arsenal. I get upset. I get frustrated. I hate other teams. I hate them in the moment. But then, of course, the game ends and everybody starts hugging, shaking hands, patting each other on the back. And you're like, you're not such a bad guy. But it's all ego. It's all ego. And it's interesting to watch how that plays out in these weird allegiances to sports teams. A sports team is not a reflection of your value on this earth. Some of us are only just now reaching a level of maturity where they can begin to understand that, but that thing can tip hard the other way. And it's very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult if you are in the presence of your rivals to not let your ego come through and take over that scenario, and I saw this play out again on the weekend. I can have empathy for Leafs fans. That feels good to me. Still hate the team. Still glad they lost. Don't want to take a bath with my toaster, but at very least, I can recognize some of the ego in that. That whole Leaf thing was supposed to be an introduction to this episode. Supposed to be a hook, but it's already basically taken up an episode because I got some music to tell you about, which I will do after the Patreon plug. Ladies and gentlemen, kids of all ages, there is a Patreon page for this podcast. It is patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. And I have one tier of membership on Patreon. It is $5 a month. You can think of it as tipping me $1.25 for every episode I do. If you are getting something from this program, if you're being edified, educated, entertained, if you are learning about new music, if there's something in this show that I'm doing that brings you back, that makes you feel good, warms your cockles, does something for you, genuinely, please consider paying me for the work I'm putting into the program, okay? I do not want to do ads. Again, I keep beating this horse, but I'm sampling podcasts all the time. I spend a lot of my time sampling new podcasts because I want to hear what people are doing and I want to hear what's making them successful. And I'm like, why am I not reaching a level and these people are? What are they doing? And so many of those podcasts are just run through with ads. I really dislike it. I don't like it as a way of, I understand why people do it, but it just bothers me. I don't want to do that, and so I've gone the Patreon route. So please consider, if this is a program you enjoy, if you're getting something from it, if it does something for you, if you think to yourself it's worth $1.25 to me, please consider signing up to my Patreon. It's $5 a month. That's a couple of cups of coffee, man. If you sat down with me somewhere and said I would buy that dude a Rickards, I would buy that dude a cup of coffee, consider, please, supporting on Patreon. Thank you to all the people who have done that. Genuinely appreciate it. It helps me keep going, man. I have merch, john-huff.com/shop. T-shirts, mugs. I am still looking for a new review on Canadian Apple. I haven't had a new review since Katie Pascoe some years ago. Could use a new review. Warms my cockles, man. Keeps me going to know you're out there listening and getting something from it. 5-star ratings are always most welcome. And ultimately, word of mouth is still the best advertising. So please do me a solid. If you can't do Patreon, if you're not into ratings and reviews, please just tell a friend that this program exists. If you know somebody who likes podcasts, you know somebody who might get something from this one, please consider sharing it. Patreon.com/JohnHuffPodcast, john-huff.com/shop. And your word of mouth is always most appreciated. And thank you ever so kindly. I got a couple of really great music recommendations to give you this week. We're going to start with Petey. I was going to tell you the story of Petey on this episode. Petey is a guy called Peter Martin, and he's just a really, really compelling story, okay? And he is I don't know what you'd call him, indie rock, kind of folk, singer-songwriter type. Very much influenced by the likes of Death Cab for Cutie or Bon Iver, kind of that art rock, indie rock thing, which I like so freaking much, man. Goes by the name Petey, Petey. Why is he an interesting story? Well, I think he grew up maybe in Chicago, somewhere in Illinois, and wanted to move to California, right? So he went to California, and he's working down there, just sort of eking out an existence in California. But he's a drummer, right? He's doing a bit of touring. He's doing some sessions, and he's also writing songs right at the same time. So Petey is doing a session for somebody recording drums, and he liked the vibe of this studio he was in. And so he says to the engineer that he's working with, can I book some time here? Want to record a couple of songs that I've written? And the dude says, sure. So he records these 2 songs, and I think he played all the instruments on it. He's one of those guys. Knocked out these tunes. And great. And he goes back home to Illinois to see some friends or whatever. And he plays the songs for one of his buddies who is connected to the music industry, right? And his buddy's like, really good songs, man. Really, really good. What do you plan to do with them? And Petey's like, I don't know. Put them on SoundCloud. Maybe kill myself. I'm reading that from an interview. End of story. Flies back to California, doing the thing. A couple weeks later, his buddy calls him up. His buddy to whom he had given the tracks. And his buddy says, look, man, let me help you. Don't screw this up. Let me help you not screw this up. All right, long story short, a couple of buddies come in to become manager of Petey. They hook him up a record deal with Terrible Records, and he records an album, and all is well. Things are looking good. And he's going to maybe do some touring. He's got this record going. And COVID hits. And that shuts down any touring. And I have personal friends who released albums on the cusp of COVID. Denny did. Carly did. And any touring, any performing that they had in mind to support that record, thrown right out the freaking window, man. COVID shut it all down. So it was with Petey. He's got these songs, he can't tour them, and they're just going to die on the freaking vine. He's like, I better do something. So he starts making TikToks, and he just does these comedy TikToks that are kind of loony and weird and funny. Develops a mass freaking audience. During the pandemic on TikTok, got like 1 million followers and something like 100 million streams of his TikToks. And then I think he moved to Capitol Records and he released another album, and now he's out touring and he's got this huge TikTok following. And there's a story in there. It's an illustration of just synchronicity, of stuff falling into place, of timing. And that's the real lesson of trees, kids. I was going to do this actually about trees and the illustration of trees, because I make a joke about you look out the window and then all of a sudden the leaves have fallen. The reality is you look out the window one day and all of a sudden the leaves are just freaking there. And you've watched the plants come up over the past few weeks as the days have gotten a little bit warmer. There's been more sunshine, and nature just knows what to do. That divine, mysterious timing of nature. Like the trees just know what to do. And I had this profound moment some years ago, and I was really lost, and I was really looking for my way. And I was trying to get somewhere as a musician, and I was trying to make stuff happen as a blogger at the time. And I went to ask a tree, because this is an old, I think this might even be an old shamanic tradition of speaking to trees who have their wisdom. So I went to ask a maple tree in my backyard about what to do or what sort of advice. And as soon as I got to the tree and I leaned against it, and I looked, and right in my eye line was a caterpillar, like right there. And what does a caterpillar represent? Caterpillar represents this extraordinary timing of nature, right? All that caterpillar had to do was be a caterpillar, let nature take its course, follow the freaking clues that come in its own intuition about finding its hiding spot and spinning a chrysalis or a cocoon, and then just trusting the processes of nature and the timing of nature to emerge into what its potential was for it to be. At the time, it was such a profound lesson in patience, right? In just doing the work and letting nature, letting the natural timing of things take its course and deliver you to what your potential is. It was really profound. And trees are an illustration of that every freaking spring. They just know somehow when it's time to wake up, when it's time to sprout leaves. The plants come up, the freaking weeds come up, all in their mysterious timing. And you look at the story of somebody like Petey, and you just see this timing unfold in the most profound way, you know? You just take the steps and things fall into place. And so Petey's got a couple records out, and he just released a new song called The River. And I just really, really love this song. If you are into the kind of indie rock, the lighter side of indie rock, art rock, like Bon Iver, like Death Cab for Cutie, like some of that stuff, I really, really like this tune, The River by Petey. It's got this really, really cool guitar line on it that ends with a couple of notes of harmonics that are just really, really freaking cool. It reminds me a little bit of the Shins, right? If you're into that kind of 2000s indie pop, indie rock, like the Shins, like Death Cab, like Bon Iver, all of that stuff, this tune by Petey, The River, fits into that category. And it's got that kind of a vocal on it. And it's guitar driven. Some drums come in. It's a gentle kind of a song, but it's really a beautiful song. Really an evocative song. And I just grabbed onto it, The River by Petey. And I'm going to check out more Petey music. I'm not on TikTok anymore. I can't watch his funny TikToks. The music is very serious. I gather that the TikToks are kind of surreal and funny. Little bit strange, but the music is very serious, and this is just a beautiful song and kind of a heartbreaking song. It's a bit of a sad song, but it's just got that kind of college music, indie rock edge to it, vocally and guitar-wise. And so I'd really love this tune, The River by Petey. And I really like his story. I think it's really fun to watch synchronicities unfold for somebody. Just playing these songs for a couple of friends who are in the business and who can come on board as managers, and then watching them land a record deal for this guy, and then having to course correct because of the pandemic, and then TikTok blows up, and then there's another record deal. And it's really encouraging and inspiring for me to watch the pieces fall into place for somebody, because if it can happen for Petey, Why can't it happen for you? Why can't it happen for me? That the right connection just gets made at the right time. And all of a sudden, everything blossoms into what it could be, like that caterpillar, like the trees coming out, like the tulips I planted last fall to come up in this spring and get eaten by the rabbits before the freaking tulips could open. You get my point. I like these synchronicities. I like these stories, and that's Petey. The other thing that I liked that I listened to in the last week or so is something very, very different. And this is a band called Unto Others. Unto Others, who used to be Idle Hands, but there was a copyright issue with the name Idle Hands. Makes you think of Bush X, makes you think of Ghost BC, makes you think of some of these bands that had to alter their names in other markets to deal with a trademark issue. So it was with Idle Hands, who became Unto Others. And Unto Others is kind of a hard rock, goth-edged, a little bit metal sort of a band. And they released a tune called Butterfly, which is on a new record that's coming out. Petey's got a new record coming out too. It's called The Closest Thing to Being Over Is Going On. So he's the kind of artist who has an album title like that. You know what I mean? Reminds me of Hayden a little bit. Anybody who's been around long enough to know Hayden, PD makes me think of Hayden. Really like Hayden. Unto Others is a goth band, is a metal band, and this song, Butterfly, just really love it. It's a dark goth metal song, but it has this really great, catchy freaking chorus. And I really love the guitar tones in this song. I love the drums on this song. And it makes me think of The Cult a little bit. Other people who were listening, who were leaving comments on the YouTube video, cool video for Butterfly. They're like playing at night. It's in what looks like a cherry orchard. So there's this kind of mystical kind of cherry blossoms, dark light, a lot of shadows. The band's wearing sunglasses. They got long hair. You know, they're all wearing like black jackets, long hair, sunglasses. They got the look. And they have this dark tinged kind of vibe. Butterfly, I'm tearing off your wings. Butterfly, you die with me. These dark, romantic, earnest, gothic kind of lyrics. And it's got that tone to it. It's very negative is the wrong word. It's very minor, but chugging guitars through it's a rock song, man. It's a hard rock song, but it's got this romantic goth edge to it. The singer sings in a lower register. We've talked about some of this stuff before. We've talked about goth stuff. We've talked about new wave stuff coming in with this sort of lower, not exactly creepy, but a little bit of a sinister vocal. But this chorus that just won't leave you alone, man. And it's really cool when a band can come in with this kind of darkness, chugging guitars, and then drop this chorus on you that isn't even, it's not one of these big anthemic glam metal choruses. It's an understated chorus, but it's catchy, man. It's a hook. And it gets into you, this song, Butterfly, and this chorus. And they've got a few records out. Unto Others has quite a big following. And there's always a market for this dark tinged, goth tinged guitar rock music. And it's heavier than some of the goth we've talked about in the past. It's got a really cool vibe to it. And the bridge just slams, man. Like, some of it is freaking heavy. That's why I say it reminds me of The Cult. Like, it is a genuine hard rock tune, but it's just got this kind of gothic edge to it. And I really like that. People who know more about it than me were comparing it to Paradise Lost. They were comparing it to Typo Negative. They're comparing it to Danzig. So if you're into any of that stuff, gothic tinged, industrial tinged, kind of chugging guitar stuff, you might dig this tune Butterfly by Unto Others. And I will put, of course, both of these songs, The River by Petey, Butterfly by Unto Others, on the John Off Podcast, referenced on the podcast 2024 playlist on Spotify. If you have not checked out that playlist, freaking do, man. All this music that I talk about is listed there. I can't play it on the freaking show or I'll get arrested. So I can fall asleep in court. You can go hear the stuff on Spotify, and there's some really great songs on that list now. Like, we are accumulating a really cool list of really cool new music that's been released this year. So go and freaking check it out, all right? And go check this out. This is hard rock goth. There are some synths happening through it. And I just think it's cool. And so their new record is coming out. And I'm trying to find the title of that record. I don't know if it's been announced yet. I don't see a title for it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Unto Others, Butterfly, Petey and the River. My voice is cooked after 3 hours of freaking pickleball. But I wanted to do this after dark. I haven't done a nighttime episode in a long time. Wanted to see how that would sound. And when I edit this tomorrow, we'll find out if I keep it or not. Gonna go, though, because I can't say much more. I want to thank you ever so much for listening once again this week. I appreciate you being around. Please consider a review. Please consider Patreon. Please consider just dropping me a line, letting me know you're listening out there, because it can feel very often like you're just working in a vacuum, man. So if you're out there listening, please do drop me a line. Let me know what you're listening to. Let me know what you're liking. I'm going to shutting up now, except to say, hey, kids. Good things happen when you put yourself out there, and I'll check you later. Yeah. Butterfly, I'm tearing off your wings. Butterfly, you die with me.